Maureen Meredith, and I am the Plan Amendment Case Manager for the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department. If you haven't done so already, please use the chat box to let us know who is here. If you're associated with an organization, if you could provide that name as well. We use this as our sign-in sheet. We ask if you could please mute your microphone if you're joining by phone, and also if you could please turn off your video if you're online so we can save bandwidth. Oh, sorry, Jesse, I forgot to ask you to record the meeting. Hit the record button.
I started.
You did? Oh, excellent.
Tiny bit late.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Tiny bit late. You might want to, if you want to restate your name, but I got most of it.
Okay, sorry. I forgot to warn you. So yes, this is the virtual community meeting for NPA 2021-0017.01. My name is Maureen Meredith. I am the Plan Amendment Case Manager for the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department. I'll just go ahead and go over this again. If you could provide your name and organization in the chat box. We use this as a sign-in sheet. We ask if you could please mute your microphone if you're joining by phone, and also if you're online to please turn off your video so we can save the bandwidth. And as we said before, this meeting is being recorded. So how to participate today. The speech bubble in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen, or it could be at the top, sometimes it changes, will open a chat box where you can type in your questions at any time. We ask that if you could please limit your general comments to the end of the Q&A session. So what we like to do is first save the chat box for questions so we can make sure we get all of them and that the questions don't get lost in miscellaneous chat. And then after all the Q&A has happened, then we open the chat box for people if you want to just add in a general comment. So after the presentations, if you click on the raise hand icon to be called on to speak, we can know who is interested in asking questions. So as you know, this is in the Crestview Wootton planning area. It's in the Crestview section. As I said, my name is Maureen Meredith. I do all the plan amendment cases in the City of Austin, and Jesse Gutierrez is another staff member who's helping me. If you want to introduce yourself, Jesse.
Good evening, everybody.
And then we have the applicant and the agents if they want to introduce themselves.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. This is Michael Galdini on behalf of the applicant, and I think we have, and they'll jump on and introduce themselves, but Michael Whalen, Melissa Nesland, and Harrison Hudson. If you guys want to say hi.
Yep, this is Michael Whalen, right here.
Hey, everyone. This is Melissa Nesland. I'll wave here. Nice to see you all. Thanks for taking the time. I'm with Stratus Properties, the applicant for the project.
And I'm Harrison Hudson with Kinley Horn, the civil engineer representing Melissa and Stratus team.
Okay, if there's anybody else?
I think that's it for us.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. So here is my contact information, and Mark Graham is the zoning planner working on the case, and here is his contact information as well. So the agenda tonight, we'll go over basic case information, guidelines for group discussion, how to participate in the process, why is there a plan amendment application, what is a future land use map. The applicant will do their presentation after mine, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So here's the property addresses: 711-3 and 711-5 Burnett Road. It's 4.39 acres. Here is the case number, NPA 2021-0017.01. Project name 7113, that should be Burnett Road, also known as 7115 Burnett Road. The FLUM request is to change the future land use map from commercial to mixed use. The associated zoning case has been filed, but it hasn't been processed, so we don't have a case number at this time. The request is to change the zoning from Commercial Service 1 CONP to CS1 CONP, CS CONP, and LO CONP to MF6 CONP for multifamily apartments. Here we have the owner is CSW Cart Inc. and the agent is Armbrust and Brown, and Michael Galdini is the agent who will be doing the presentation. So guidelines for group discussion. Due to the need for social distancing, in-person questions and comments have been moved to this online format. Please allow everyone a chance to speak. Please listen carefully and actively. Criticize ideas, not individuals. Commit to learning, not debating. Avoid blame, speculation, inflammatory language. Avoid assumptions about others, especially based on their perceived social group. And staff deserves the right to delete offensive language and remove offenders from the meeting. And we haven't had any problems at our meetings, but we like to go ahead and provide these guidelines. Guidelines for the group discussion. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time during this meeting. Please postpone your general comments to the end of the Q&A session. After staff and the applicant presentations, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol on the menu bar. Telephone participants will be able to speak during the Q&A session of the meeting. Attendees will be muted upon arrival and through the staff and applicant presentations. Then staff will open the floor to answer questions in the chat or by attendees raising their hands to speak. Similar questions may be grouped together and answered together. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking for the sake of sound quality and clarity of conversation. If you are having connection issues, turn off your video until called upon to ask your question. So how to participate in this process. If you have questions after this meeting, they will be answered and made available by request within 5 business days and then posted on the city's website there. You can email or call the case managers with any questions or comments that you have. If you provide written comments, they will be added to the staff case reports. You will get a notice in the mail with the date and time of the Planning Commission and City Council hearings if you live within 500 feet. And these notices will also have ways in which you can participate in the meetings. So why is there a neighborhood plan amendment? Neighborhood plans are adopted by City Council as amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. The city charter requires zoning changes to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Most neighborhood plan amendments are amendments to a plan's future land use map. And most neighborhood plan amendments have an associated zoning application. Sorry. So this map shows in blue areas that have City Council approved neighborhood plans, most of which have a future land use map. Future land use map looks like this. This is the Crestview Wootton future land use map, and the colors represent broad land uses. And for example, Civic has a light blue color, pink office, brown is mixed use, red is commercial, orange multifamily, and purple industrial. So the property currently has commercial land use, and you see it in red. And the proposed land use is mixed use, which is the brown color. And this chart shows the typical zoning districts that you could find within the broad land use categories. And these typical zoning districts would be considered consistent with the land use category. So this is just an aerial photo from the city's property profile that shows the property. Hold on. Did I lose? Hold on one second. Try it again. There we go. I touched the screen and it got all wonky. There we go. Little crooked, but and so this is from our property profile, an aerial photo. This is just from Google Maps. I like to add this map just to show some of the surrounding uses of the property. These are just Google Map pictures of the property, and then a view south on Burnett Road, a view north. You can see the property on the right, and then just a snapshot of the property across the street. This map shows the future land use map. You can see the property is red, and that's the commercial land use. There's commercial land use to the north, single family to the west, multifamily to the southwest, mixed use directly to the south, and across the street to the west is no planning area. So there is no future land use designations on those properties. And this map shows the existing zoning. So you see some CSCO to the north. You can see on the property to the east is a limited office conditional overlay and some single family SF3, MF3, and then directly to the south, some GR, VMU. And across the street, some CS zoning. This map is the growth concept map from the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. You could see the properties on an activity corridor, and you can see in relation to the property where the activity centers are, you see Anderson Lane to the northwest, and you see the Crestview Station to the east. That ends my presentation, and then Michael can start his.
Excellent. Okay. All right, can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. So, thank you, everyone. I'm hearing
You're echoing, Gardini.
yeah, is everyone else muted? Let's make sure. If everyone's muted, then I should. Okay. No, I'm still active. Okay, well, everyone make sure that you're muted so that I'm not cycling through, and then I'll just continue. So thanks, Maureen and Jesse. My name is Michael Galdini. I'm here to represent the applicant. And with me today, as I mentioned earlier, are Michael Whalen, who I work with, Melissa Nesland, who is the applicant, and Harrison Hudson, who is the applicant's engineer. And we will all be available for questions after the presentation. I may answer a lot of your questions throughout this, but if not, we'll get to them afterwards. So as Maureen mentioned, we're here to discuss amending the future land use map. That's what this meeting is for, to reflect mixed use. Though there are other two related cases that are in the process of being processed for intake. So they'll be available in the Amanda system soon, and I'll send them to Mike Levine, the neighborhood association, so he can distribute them as well. One of the other cases is a request for rezoning to MF6 COMP. Base zoning of MF6, we have a placeholder conditional overlay there for now, though we'll discuss some potential provisions that could go into it through discussions that we've had with the Crestview Neighborhood Association. Nothing has been decided on that yet, but I'll discuss that later, as well as a termination of an outdated restrictive covenant from the 1970s. That's a lot of procedural talk, but the streamlined version is that what we're asking for are the zoning approvals to be able to build a 330 unit apartment complex on Burnett Road, 10% of those total number of units. So at 330, that would be 32 units set aside as long-term affordable. And according to the city's housing inventory, those would be the first income restricted units in Crestview to date. So for context, this property already allows redevelopment today as a large office and commercial building. No discretionary approvals would be needed for that to move into site plan because that's what the existing zoning allows for. But it doesn't yet allow for multifamily, which is why we're bringing forward these cases. And I'll dive into those details in a moment, but first want to give you some background as well, because some of you may recognize that this all sounds a little bit familiar. It's because there was a very similar case to this that was filed last year, also for base zoning of MF6. The applicant and the owner are both different, but the case itself is broadly similar, as you can see in the table that I've provided here. As with the previous case, the request here is for MF6. It's for a multifamily project, 10% of total units as income restricted affordable units. The total unit count is a little bit lower than the prior projects. It's at 330 rather than 360 units. And those units are kind of our best guess given what we know of the different site constraints. So it could go down if you have more constraints discovered, that type of thing, but operating off of the best information we have right now. And that case went through most of the city process, received approval by the Planning Commission and by City Council on the first reading. Though ultimately the prior owner, as you know, speaking generically, a lot of folks know that oftentimes in zoning cases you have the owner and you have an applicant that's looking to buy the property, so you kind of need approval from all parties. In that ultimately the prior owner ended up withdrawing the case before council could take it up for a final vote. So this is a picture of the site today. I'm sure you're already familiar with it. It's the former Dallas nightclub site. It's used mainly today as commercial space. The bar, it's no longer the Dallas nightclub, but there's still a bar in the front. There's some vehicular uses towards the back. I believe longstanding auto sales use back there, even though it's zoned for office, so it's would be a non-conforming use at this point in time. And it's mostly paved with exterior surface parking. There's a driveway that connects the site to the shopping center next door. And there's an existing access easement that allows vehicles from this property to use that next door shopping center access in order to get to the signalized intersection at Burnett and Greenlawn. Some of you who remember the prior case last year may remember that the transportation department had questions about that. That has already been locked down and that access exists. So this property does have a right to access to the signalized Burnett and Greenlawn intersection, which we know is important in terms of folks being able to get in and out of the site and the way that the turning works. This, as Maureen mentioned, this is the current zoning. It's an aerial of the site here. As you all know, the zoning determines how the site can be redeveloped today without any further zoning approvals needed by the city. So this determines what the by right development standards would be. So right here you have office towards the back of the site. That's the portion that says LO. And then towards the front of the site, you have two of the most intensive commercial zoning districts allowed in this part of the city. That's CS and CS1. And for context, CS1 is the only commercial zoning district allowed in this part of the city that allows you to have a bar. So, you know, there's other zoning districts.
Michael, do you want to use, somebody asked maybe not using acronyms, just so they know commercial services, limited office, etc., and conditional overlay and neighborhood plan.
Yes. So CS is commercial services. CS1, the one just means that you're allowed to have a bar. Everything else is largely the same as commercial services, just as is. LO means limited office. And as Waylon mentioned, CO means conditional overlay, which means that there are little variations in the provisions that are specific to those properties. In this case, I believe there's some additional restrictions on uses, as well as some kind of setback variations. And the NP stands for neighborhood plan, which means that we're in a neighborhood planning area. In this case, it's the Crestview neighborhood plan, Crestview neighborhood plan, but we are in Crestview. So all together, when you put all these things together and you kind of look at what they all mean in tandem and overlapping, the existing zoning would allow today a redevelopment that is fully commercial and an office project to move forward by right without any zoning approvals needed. So what does that mean in terms of comparison to what we're requesting? So this is a comparison from our request right now as it stands without the kind of neighborhood potential compromise components that I'll mention later. This is just the base request as stands in comparison to what the existing zoning would allow. These are the major development rules for the site. They're not the only ones because it's, it's the city. There are a bunch of rules, but these are the major ones that limit how a site can be developed. And what you'll see here is that there is a trade-off. So by moving to MF6, which is multifamily 6, which is what we're requesting, we would decrease the intensity of the site in most respects. There's going to be less pavement, less building cover, lower intensity uses allowed. And in exchange for that, the ask would be more height up on the front of the site, which is closer to Burnett Road. So you can see here, these are the major increases. Today, the height caps out at 90 feet, but under our request, it would be allowed to gradually increase, and we'll see this in a moment, gradually increase after you're about a football field's length away from the closest single-family home. As Levine has noted before, that's a football field minus the end zones, so 100 yards, 300 feet. And the floor to area ratio would likewise increase to allow for this additional area, though the space would be limited by the building cover, by compatibility limits, and those other limiters as well. That's the main ask. The additional height would be up closer to Burnett Road. And in return, the site's intensity would be lowered overall. So as you can see here, the amount of pavement allowed would significantly decrease. That's the impervious cover. That's basically pavement or anything that's hard surface that water cannot be absorbed into. The building cover would also meaningfully decrease, and the intensity of uses would meaningfully decrease. Bar is generally kind of your most intensive use, but there's other commercial uses allowed, and we would be giving up all right to a bar use or any commercial or auto services use or anything like that, and we would be limited just to multifamily, which as a use comparison, generally you see a lower number of trips and just lower overall intensity for multifamily uses. In terms of height, compatibility would still limit the back portions of the property, keeping it mostly the same as it is today. There is a small portion of the back lot that would technically be allowed to step up to 50 feet, where it's today limited to 40 feet. That's kind of just depending on where you are compatibility-wise. That's why that one section there has a wavy, approximately equal sign. We've put forward a proposed compromise with the neighborhood association that, if accepted, would make that fully equal. And I'll get into that in a little bit later, but just wanted to start that for y'all. And so, like I said, the main ask here would be the additional height closer to Burnett Road, and while the overall decrease in intensity in the other aspects of the site and the community benefit of affordable housing. The other major comparison that I've provided here is to a vertical mixed use project, which kind of called VMU. You see the V in there and the MU. That's known as vertical mixed use. I've included it as a comparison here because vertical mixed use is the go-to alternative for a lot of new projects, especially along corridors, and it's already allowed up and down parts of Burnett Road. So it's not allowed on this site today. We've already covered what is allowed, but in terms of thinking through what multifamily 6 means, and you're looking at alternatives, this is kind of the closest alternative that folks generally ask for, and it's already provided along large portions of Burnett Road. And when you look at it, it's kind of a similar analysis here. The main ask, actually, as far as I can tell, the only real increase in intensity of the major limiters is that ability to continue to step up to a larger height up along Burnett Road. In the case of full MF6, that's 90 feet, whereas all of the other portions of it are a overall decrease in intensity. In terms of pavement and building cover, a meaningful, significant decrease in intensity, and the other portions being equal. So I'm talking about height kind of stepping up and down. What does that all mean just in terms of looking at it? Well, this is a clip from a city document that shows how compatibility works in practice, that shows how those step ups and step downs in height are actually required by the city. So this, if you look on the far left, you see a little kind of model single family house, and you can see what is allowed to happen as long as your zoning allows it. So first, you have no building in that first 25 feet, and then you're allowed to go to 30 feet or 2 stories, and then you're allowed to go to 40 feet or 3 stories, and then you can step up 1 foot in height for every 10 feet of setback. And then once you go beyond 300 feet, you're allowed to step up 1 foot in height for every 4 feet of setback. And where that lands you is that you can reach 75 feet of height once you're about 360 feet from the closest single family home, and you can reach 90 feet of height at 420 feet from the closest single family home. And now on this city document, it kind of continues to slope up because this is a generic document. But what, just for our purposes here, you should know is that you're capped at whatever your zoning is. So because MF6 only allows for 90 feet of height, you're not able to continue up as this would show. You're capped at 90 feet whenever you can reach that. And if we agree to a limit below that, as I'll talk about potentially a little bit later, you would be capped at whatever that height limit would be. This piece here shows those kind of like where those distances would occur on the site from above. So you can see how far they are from the single family homes along the back and the back side there. So the line on the right shows you how far you would need to get to in order to exceed 60 feet of height at all. So you can only exceed 60 feet of height after you go beyond that, right? Heading towards the left, heading towards Burnett Road. So that's kind of, and then the next step would be, that's the next line would be the distance until you can reach the full 90 feet of height under MF6. So this is what I'm referring to when I say that the height we're asking for would be up closer to Burnett Road. So with, that's what we're asking for in terms of the overall intensity of the sites being lowered. We're asking for more height. And when I say we're asking for that up on Burnett Road, this is what that means in terms of where on the site those things would be allowed to occur. The other major component I talked about was affordability. So as part of this project, we would be entering into a restrictive covenant with a third-party enforcer, that restrictive covenant, which is just an agreement, and it would run with the land. It wouldn't just be with the parties, but it would actually run with the property itself. And it would require 10% of the total number of units be made affordable at 60% of median family income. And that's the same standard that the city uses for vertical mixed-use projects, the kind of standard, a lot of the types of projects that occur along corridors that I mentioned earlier. And what does 60% of median family income mean in real dollars? The city adjusts these figures every year, but for this year, that would mean about $960 for a 1-bedroom apartment. It would mean about $1,090 for a 2-bedroom apartment, and it would continue to step up from there. At 330 units total, that would mean 33 affordable units, which is actually double the number of affordable units produced along Burnett Road per year on average. As you can see down there, the average annual production along Burnett Road is about 15 units per year. And this single project would provide 33, which is more than double the average. And as I mentioned earlier, according to the city's housing inventory, these would actually be the first long-term income restricted units provided in Crestview to date, which we're very excited about. So the final thing, the last major topic I want to hit before opening it up to questions is about some of the engagement potential for a compromise plan that I'd referenced throughout the previous parts of the presentation. So during the last case, we met extensively with the Crestview Neighborhood Association throughout the project, and we eventually landed on some key concessions, and the current applicant, even though it's a different applicant this time, is willing to stand by those concessions if the neighborhood association is willing to agree to them, and we could come together on a compromise consensus plan. Our proposal would be that for the neighborhood, for their side of it, that the Crestview Neighborhood Association, that they would support our project at the Planning Commission and at City Council, and for our part, we would agree to significantly reduce the height entitlements and commit to meaningful buffering, fencing, and ensure interior dumpster placement. And of course, we would also be kind of fully complying with the requirements for hooded, shielded lighting And as I mentioned, the mobility access that ATD would be requiring that would allow us to get through and access the signalized intersection. So this would reduce the overall height entitlement by 15 feet. So MF6 allows, or multifamily 6, our base zoning that we're requesting would, if you didn't change anything, it would allow 90 feet of height. And through this compromise plan, we would be willing to reduce that to 75 feet. And we would extend the height cap in the back closer to the single family to 40 feet within 200 feet of single family homes. Today, that cap only extends to 100 feet. So that would double the area that would be just capped at a straight 40 feet. And when the project would also ensure a new fence and would maintain the new fence around the property. It's something that we'd heard, especially from the folks that live in the Allendale condos, that they would like, or some of the folks that live in the Allendale condos, that they would like to see a new fence along that property line, and also have clarity that we will be maintaining that fence. And then also for buffering along the single family properties, shade trees, and canopy understory and shade trees to help improve visual buffering. So this is just to get a sense of what those concessions on height would mean. Under the full MF6, what our baseline request is, as I said, that's the distance until you can get to 75 feet of height. And then it would continue to step up until you get to 90 feet of height, right about there at the left-hand dotted line. So under the compromise plan, we would kind of get rid of, we would waive our rights to any height beyond that 75 feet. So once you're able to reach that, that would be the maximum across the entire site, decrease, as I said, of 15 feet. And then for the rear, this is the area right now. Within that line, to the right of that line today, you're only able to go up to 40 feet or less. So parts of that are 30 feet, parts of that are 40 feet. But within that line, to the right of that line, you're not able to go above 40 feet. And we would expand those protections through our compromise proposal and to allow an expanded area where you're only allowed 40 feet or less. So that would actually be more protective than what exists today, more protective than what could be developed today under the existing entitlements. And overall, I think that this kind of broader package that we would be proposing with hopefully for consideration by the Crestview Neighborhood Association would be a win-win. I think it would provide for our purposes, it would provide a steadier process for us at Planning Commission and at City Council. And for the neighborhood, it would provide more certainty and it would lock in meaningful protections for the neighborhood, in addition to the decrease in intensity that would just baseline occur in terms of things like less pavement, lower building area, lower building cover area, and so forth. So to recap, we're requesting a downzoning to MF6 COMP zoning to build an apartment complex that would include the first income restricted units available in Crestview. We would be asking for additional height that's closer up to Burnett Road. And in exchange for that, the zoning would offer less pavement, lower overall site intensity, lower intensity of uses, lower building cover. And we would be willing to further restrict those site intensities if doing so would earn neighborhood support of Crestview Neighborhood Association at Planning Commission and City Council. So with that, I have just thrown a ton of information at y'all. So why don't we go into questions? I'll be here for questions. Michael Whalen also, and Melissa Neslin and Harrison Hudson. So I'm sure that with between the four of us, we will be able to field most of your questions. And if we can't, we will go back and we'll get back to you with the answers later.
Okay, so first off, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first off, Ian asked if they can get a copy of this PowerPoint that you just presented.
Yes, and I believe that since we're in a city meeting as well, it's also public record. But I'm happy to send it. I'll send it, I guess, to I can either send. I'll send it to Maureen and also to Mike Levine, and then I'm sure that way we can get it to Ian or any other folks that might request it.
Okay, and as Jesse responded, it would also be, part of the recorded meeting that gets posted to Speak Up Austin. So Joe, let's see, in their raise hands, I will unmute Joe. Let's see. Joe, if you want to unmute yourself, looks like I can't unmute you.
Okay. Yeah, this is Joe Reynolds.
Hey, Joe.
Michael, I've got a question. Allendale has single family across the street, and so we're wondering what the height is going to be when our setbacks are considered. I didn't see that on the map, just the stuff in the back.
Yeah, so to the extent that there is, because we're like probably up on the front, there will be something of a impact to compatibility. But regardless of what happens, it would be fully compliant with compatibility. As you know, the only way really to get out of compatibility is to prove a hardship at the Board of Adjustment. And the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial board that doesn't.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, so, I know that you are. You're very well versed in this. But just in case there's other folks who are here who might not be as, as into the city kind of process and policy. Just Board of Adjustment for folks' understanding is a quasi-judicial board. That means you're not allowed to lobby them. They don't consider things on whether it's kind of the right thing or wrong thing from a policy perspective. They just consider things as to whether you have a demonstrated hardship, whether you have some physical characteristics of your site that are abnormal or things along those lines. So the reason why that matters is because, as Joe mentioned, there's potentially some compatibility impact from the Allendale site, which would potentially limit some of the height on the front portion. But it is my understanding that, yes, you are able to reach, there are portions of it where you are able to go up to kind of full height or a partial full height or along different segments. So it is realistic that you would be able to see the types of heights that we're asking for.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question.
Next person is Janice. If you want to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So my question is, Michael, as far as the real party in interest of this property, is that the record owner of the property? And if so, who is the record owner?
Well, first of all, we have the applicant here, and I'll bring on kind of Melissa to describe her role as the applicant. The real owner of the property is an entity named CSW Cart Inc. We represent the applicant, and the applicant has the property under contract, which basically the way that works, and this is the way it works for many different zoning cases, is that someone will only close on the property once they have the zoning in place, and they are the entity that takes it through that process. And for us, we're representing Melissa. So I don't know if Melissa, you want to pop on and say hi. She's still on here.
Are you?
I don't know if she can speak simultaneously. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. Melissa Nesland, I'm with Stratus Properties. We are under contract to purchase the property. But as Michael said, the purchase of the property is subject to moving forward with this rezone.
Okay,
so to answer any. Yes.
I just was going to ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
So after you have the contract, since you're not yet the record owner, is it a possibility that someone else might take over that contract, and whatever concessions we get an understanding about now might not be honored by someone who might take the contract from you and then record their ownership of the property?
Good question. So what the way that would work is that any concessions that occur here would be put into this placeholder conditional overlay that I have. And for folks that aren't aware, conditional overlays are city instruments by which different restrictions are placed onto a specific property. And those conditional overlays cannot be unilaterally removed by a future owner. If it's in a conditional overlay, it can only be removed if the city council removes it. So to answer your question, if this went forward and we put those provisions into a conditional overlay and then the property was sold, no, the next property would have to honor that. And if they felt that they wanted to reopen the whole kit and caboodle, they would have to come through this exact process that we're kind of going through right now for the rezone. At that, they may not have the neighborhood plan amendment portion, but they would have to go through the rezone process and be honored through that. And for the affordable housing component, because of state law, that component's not allowed to be done with the city on this project, but we would put it into a restrictive covenant that would run with the land. And when I say run with the land, I mean, it doesn't matter who it moves on to next, that would continue to be enforceable upon them.
Okay, so that's a different question actually than I asked. The question is not about a subsequent record owner changing things, because I understand you're saying they'd have to come back and redo a bunch of things. My question is what happens in the interim if for some reason CSW CART finds some new party that wants to take over their interest in acquiring the record ownership before there is a change of ownership in the county clerk's records?
Oh, so you mean before the zoning case is complete?
I mean, before there is a change of record ownership in the clerk's records. In other words, it used to be a long number of years ago, people used to call that a flip. An earnest money contract might be traded. And so a seller might think they had a party in line to buy the property. And somehow the property became owned by someone other than the first in line who had a contract on the property.
So
contract different from deed to the property.
I don't quite understand the question itself, but if the question is about whether the provisions would continue to be honored if ownership changed, the answer to that is yes, because they would be in a conditional overlay, they would be in a restrictive covenant. Both of those run with the land, regardless of how the ownership works.
And that's not my question.
Okay, I don't quite understand.
My question would be, a person who has a contract is not an owner. They are a pending owner. And so if you have CSW CART as the prospective owner through a contract, if CSW CART then transfers this to WSC Limited Liability Partnership, and it's a different entity, and they still yet have not recorded the property and they still don't have the overlay finished, but they have traded their contract to acquire the property. That's my concern, is that interim step between the first contract to acquire the property and the actual filing of a deed in the name of the new owner.
Right. So I guess
I think I can answer that. This is Michael Whalen. The ownership, and I think Gaudini said this, but just so we're clear, let's say there is a flip in the property, as you just said, and there's a brand new owner before. I guess your concern would be after the zoning has been approved or before the zoning has been approved?
I think I'm talking now more about the ability of the neighborhoods to agree to some concessions with someone that will actually be the owner of record. Say owner, I don't mean owner as a person with a contract. I mean an owner who has a deed and is recorded.
I see. So yeah, so your agreement is, interestingly, is yes, you're agreeing with the ownership through Stratus, who's the buyer, but that agreement is actually being presented to the city council. The city council doesn't care who owns the property, because the agreement will be reflected in the conditional overlay, which becomes part of the ordinance that then gets enforced by the city. So the ownership is not, in this particular instance, in terms of the enforcement of the conditions, the ownership is not relevant, because it will be tied to an ordinance that runs with the property, regardless of whether or who owns the property.
So Stratus has a record ownership, and there's a deed in the county clerk's records that they have this property?
No, Stratus doesn't own the property. It's the CSW CART Inc. entity. We have agent authorization to file the zoning case and communicate on behalf of them to engage in these negotiations that would then get incorporated in a ordinance.
And only the city council could have the ability to, so it doesn't matter what, if in your scenario, ownership changed, it wouldn't matter what that owner said, that ultimately would lie with the city council.
And so is there an opportunity for a new party to step in the shoes of CSW CART before the time that the overlay would be approved and things, as you say, locked into place?
If I mean, that like theoretically something like that could occur, what would happen in terms of what I think your question is, what would happen is that it would be presented to the city council and the neighborhood would say, we reached this agreement. And then the city council would have the authority to say, this is the conditional overlay, regardless of what other folks moving outside of that. They could always pull the case, but they could not go on and unilaterally change it themselves and impose it on themselves, because the city council is ultimately the entity that has that authority.
And maybe we should have Maureen or somebody from the city, answer how they've seen this done before.
Well, I mean, let's say for my plan amendment cases, when an application is filed, you have the property owner gives the agent and or applicant the authority to go through the plan amendment and zoning process. What happens after that, if it changes hands throughout the plan amendment or zoning process, then we get the deed and we get the notification that X owner of property at the time the application was filed is no longer the owner. It's now this person. Usually it becomes the applicant who had originally filed. So we just get updated as if anything changes through the ownership. But we just ask for updated documentation. We have a lot of questions backing up here. Janice, did they, for the most part, answer your question?
I think partially, but in the interest of time, I will hold back and see if I can get that question addressed.
Okay.
Another way.
So I'm going to now go to the chat box. Brad Russell has a number of questions. First one is, how high will the new fence be? You may have already answered that, but that's one of his first questions.
I'll bring on Melissa. I don't know if you've looked at that yet. That usually comes up at site plan, but I don't know. Melissa, if you have any thoughts?
Yeah.
I think we might have
Can you all
lost.
hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
now
I think I'm here. The *6 seems to have a pause. We do not specifically have a design or height determined, but we would certainly be meeting whatever the code requirement is, and want to respect what obviously the neighbors would prefer. But we don't have a height nailed down at this point.
Okay. Next question is, where
Okay,
will
can I respond to that, or?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So essentially, you guys are saying, oh, we're going to have a new fence. We're going to maintain that. But that could be a 1-foot fence. We don't know. We don't have any information as to how high that is or if it serves any purpose regarding privacy to the homeowners.
So what I can commit to is I don't think we would want a 1-foot high fence, nor would you. So at the very minimum, we would meet code. And if you wanted a 10-foot fence and code allows that without us, having to proceed with a variance, we would certainly be amenable. And if we need a private restrictive covenant to detail the height and type of fence, I mean, I think that's certainly something we can coordinate and discuss offline. I don't think that's something that could be in a city conditional overlay. I could be wrong. I can let one of Michael Gaudini or Wayland state that, but we're looking to make sure you have the necessary privacy and your neighbors as well as ours. We understand your concern there. So we're more than willing to
It's
work with you on that.
Yeah, 6-foot fence is the standard. By code, if all property owners adjacent to you agree, you can go to 8 feet. That's the max.
And we would be certainly willing to do 8 feet, 8-foot high fence if that's what the preference would be.
Okay.
So the next question Brad has is, where will the parking garage be located?
That's a good question, and Melissa, you can kind of confirm. But my understanding is that the parking garage would be kind of a wrap product, so the parking garage would be internal to the product. But I don't know, Melissa, if you have more detail or you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I can just reiterate what you said. The parking garage would be internal to the project, kind of simply stated, kind of smack in the middle, would be our main point of access will be the southernmost property boundary, as you can imagine, with the Burnett corridor plans and proximity to Green Lawn Signal. Preliminary conversations with Austin Transportation Department have been that we need to have our access drive far south as possible. So the garage would be accessed from our southern drive, and then as Michael mentioned, we also have a access easement with the property to the north that's recorded and in place. It's a perpetual access easement. So our garage driveway will align. You can come into the project or right in, right out from that southern property line, as I mentioned. You'll access our garage through there, and then there will be a straight through to the existing shared access drive. So if you're on the property today, you'll notice that there is a shared access drive existing, and that will be the main drive to our garage, and it will be wrapped by units. So it will not be visible from Burnett or from the neighborhood on the east or west, frankly. I mean, it's internal to the property.
Okay, I'm having trouble understanding where you're referring to when you say the south part of the property. Is cars going to be coming into the complex from where the residential homes are?
No, I'm sorry for any confusion. The only access point, or I don't say the only, but the primary access point will be off of Burnett. There will be no access through to any of the neighborhood whatsoever to the east. So we will have an access drive on our southernmost property line. We'll take you to the garage. And the other alternate access point would be you would go through the garage to the north to the existing commercial shopping center that gets you to the light. So there's no access beyond where our garage entry is on that southern property line. So yeah, I don't know if, Michael, you can kind of point on the exhibit, but vehicular access will be kind of stopped midpoint in the property. The only alternate to that is, and I think this is a question that maybe is in the chat as well, would be fire access, and that is only down the back of the building to provide adequate fire access should that be necessary. But that would be grass pavers, and we're in conversations with Austin Fire Department. At this point, there would be no vehicular access back around the building near the single family.
Yes, so just to pick up on that, and I think it might be on the screen. I tried to pull up the aerial, but basically, if you're imagining, if you're driving north on Burnett Road, and you take a right into the site, what she's saying is that at the first kind of your first point, if you're driving around, you're on the southern portion of the site. You're driving around the buildings on the new building is on your left. You would be able to turn left into the building. The parking garage would be internal. If you could also continue through, and then that would lead you to the other access point of the site, which is the connection to the shopping center just north, which also allows you to connect and access the signalized intersection. If you did not turn left into the building itself, if you continued out, there would be a what we're envisioning is kind of green pavers, which would be more environmentally friendly. that would serve as an emergency lane that would continue along to the around the back of the property that would be used, if an emergency services vehicle needed it.
And we can send, if it's helpful,
And,
we can send a diagram, a diagram that shows what we're talking about here. Location of the parking garage, where we would intend to enter the property, the garage, and how one would get through the property to the north to the signal, if that's helpful. Just to, I understand it's hard visually on a Zoom to try to articulate this.
Yes, and with the understanding that circulation in terms of how vehicles move is ultimately at the you need to meet Austin Transportation Department standards on how the access points.
Yeah, that'd definitely be helpful. And also I'm interested in knowing, is there going to be cars driving back and forth directly behind my house?
The answer to that is no. They have nowhere to go. I mean, no, there's not proposed access back there.
Okay, so there's not going to be a road alongside the building and also an internal garage. There's going to be only an internal garage.
You will have a road up to where you access the internal garage, which, like I mentioned visually, if you can just think of kind of the center of the property, there will be grasscrete pavers, we expect, based on preliminary conversations with Austin Fire Department, that would only be permissible access for a fire truck in an emergency situation. So there will be no vehicular traffic for a resident back behind the building and adjacent to the single family.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So keep going on Brad's questions, and Brad, please chime in if you wanted to get some clarification of what I read out. So how far from my backyard fence will the building start?
So some of that.
Yeah, so how many feet till we see a building, or if we were to walk up to that building from my fence, how many feet would that be?
So there's a couple. Well, let me step back a moment. So there's what compatibility requires, and then there's what you can actually do under all these various overlaying requirements. Sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. So compatibility requires that you cannot start building until at least 25 feet. That's just if you don't have to do anything else. 25 feet is what you are required distance-wise in terms of city rules. But on top of that, you also have requirement as Mr. was noting, to have an emergency access lane so that emergency vehicles are able to access back portions of that area. And as she mentioned, that would be limited. It wouldn't be like you would have a kind of lane with a lot of cars circulating back there, but nevertheless, it is required to exist. So it would provide some additional space for that area. But I don't know, Melissa, if you wanted to speak a bit more to that.
Well, I can add to, so at a minimum, it's a 25-foot setback to your point. And that's compatibility. So that's aside from the base zoning site development regulations, but we do have to be able to provide fire access. So that's obviously, trumps kind of a base zoning setback, compatibility setback. So we're still very early in conceptual design. My civil engineer Harrison is on the call, but right now, in order to meet fire, it looks like, practically speaking, that's probably more of a 30-foot setback to be able to meet the radius requirements to get back behind the building. And so at a minimum, it's 25 feet, but practically speaking, it is probably a little more than that.
Yeah, and I would note that the single family setback is 10 feet at the rear. This would be, 3 times that at 30 feet.
Okay,
so 30 feet, and then we can have a 40-foot tall building.
Under the your height on is 35 feet for a single family residence.
Right. So you're not allowed to go right up to 40 feet immediately. You have to have at least 50 feet before you can get to 40 feet. So the first, if you're imagining this, if you have, let's say you have a 30-foot gap, you would then only be allowed to have 30 feet. So we would actually be lower than what a single family would be allowed to have, because a single family in this area, you could have a 32-foot building, a lot closer to your back lot. So if you're thinking about it in terms of height, we are actually required to be shorter than what another single family in a similarly situated area would be allowed to have. And then once you get beyond the 50 feet is when you're allowed to go to 40 feet. And then and then as I mentioned earlier, we would be extending the 40-foot limit area out to 200 feet rather than the existing, what you could do today without any approvals necessary. You could begin sloping upwards after 100 feet rather than after 200 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Brad's last question is, are these height restrictions revocable?
So if we go forward with the case and everyone agrees and then they're in the conditional overlay, they cannot be removed unless the city council removes them. So know that Melissa would not be able to come in after they get the zoning. Melissa would not be able to come in and say, you know what, actually, I want to do something completely different. Because they would be literally law at that point. They would be city code, and only the city council would have the authority to modify or revoke or change that code in any way. And then that would run with the land.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to people who have their hands raised. So Nancy, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. My question is, if I remember correctly, when this case came up last year, the flume was being asked to be changed to multifamily. At this time, I noticed it's being asked to go to mixed use. Since this project doesn't plan to utilize any commercial, why is it changed from what's the change, I guess is what I'm asking.
It's there is kind of no, I mean, like the various different flume things overlap, and a lot of them allow the same types of rezones. And so when we were putting this together, we looked at it, and mixed use allows MF6, so that's what we went with.
Is there any reason why you didn't want to go with multifamily zoning instead of mixed use?
Say that again?
What would be the reason for not going with multifamily zoning instead of mixed use?
I think the prior applicant on the last case just had a preference for that FLUM designation. Yeah.
Well, and I would just say, I was just going to add, as applicant, we don't feel strongly either way. Our proposal is just a multifamily project. As you all are probably aware, going up and down Burnett and Lamar, there's a lot of, while vertical mixed use was a great effort, and I think has been successful in many parts of the city, it doesn't work everywhere, and we're not looking to have empty vacant space. We'd prefer to activate our ground floor with amenities and co-working space that will be helpful to our residents. And so I don't know that, we don't have a strong feeling as to whether or not the FLUM says mixed use or multifamily, but if you look up and down Burnett and that the exhibit that Maureen presented previously, the majority of the properties up and down Burnett Road do have a mixed use land use designation. So I think when visiting with Michael Gaudini and Whalen, from a land use perspective, mixed use made a little more sense. But the regulations associated with what we're proceeding with the MF6 and then the conditional overlays we're talking about, that's the real driver as far as the site development regulations and what we were actually able to construct. So if there's a strong feeling that the future land use map should reflect just the multifamily, I don't know that we have an opinion there. I think from a purely land use perspective, mixed use makes more sense, but that's not something we have a strong preference on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see. We will go back to the questions in the chat. I will go ahead and read Carolyn's comment. Even an 8-story building will be extremely intrusive to homeowners on the west side of Burnett Road. Essentially, it makes every backyard within 500 feet into public space. Even with an 8-foot fence, nude swimming will be public. This sounds extremely entitled to visual distance. Meanwhile, the owner is offering only a pittance and reduction of impervious cover. So that's the comment. We'll go on to Brad's question. Will there be a commercial, will there be in commercial stores and services at the bottom of the buildings?
No, there would not be. As part of requesting MF6, we would be required to give up all rights to commercial uses, which at this, because we have Commercial Services 1, CS1, which is, the most that you can ask for basically in this part of the city, it would be a significant, meaningful decrease in the intensity of uses to say, I'm hereafter going to only limit myself to being able to do residential.
Okay. Michelle, I saw you light up when I read Carolyn's comment. Did you want to say anything? Just want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say Michelle or Melissa? Were you speaking to me as applicant?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's Melissa.
Melissa, sorry.
Sorry. The question, well, first of all, I'll say we're not proposing an 8-story project, at least with what Michael presented previously. We would be willing to cap the height at 75 feet, which would assume 6 stories maximum. And to Michael's point too, we would be stepping back to 40 feet, expanded 40 feet if you're measuring from the eastern property boundary. And then I think a gentleman, and I'm sorry, I don't remember everyone's names, asked about compatibility from the Allendale side, so across Burnett. We would be meeting compatibility there too, which likely means, and we're still looking at the conceptual site plan, but I think that first probably row of units in the frontage on Burnett is more likely going to be in the 60-foot range, so 5 stories up to 6 stories, and then back down on the back part of the property. So max height would be 75 feet for a very small section of the project, and when I say 75 feet, that's 6 stories. So I'll just be clear there that there's no 8-story proposal. That's the only thing I would add.
And tagging on to that, I think the at least the last time around, Planning Commissioner Todd Shaw, who is the District 7 appointee for Planning Commission, he actually did a really, and I hadn't thought about it in this way, but he I guess he kind of has a scientific background. He laid out what your kind of like points of vision are, and that version was actually asking for 85 feet rather than 75 feet. But when he did the points of kind of vision from different areas, what he found was that for most of this, it's not like it's this kind of, if you're envisioning this thing that's lording over the entire area, it's not actually that in terms of what you're actually able to realistically see from different points. And I believe that I remember that when he pulled that out because he did that himself. And I believe that's still probably in the backup from that case, his sketch on that. And then the other piece being, I just wanted to mention that this is actually a pretty meaningful reduction in impervious cover and building cover. I don't think you typically see this on different cases. Usually, especially if it's a vertical mixed use project, you see a significant amount of impervious cover. And often folks, when they redevelop, they keep about the same, or if not the same amount of impervious cover or more that is there. This would be a project that would have a meaningful reduction in allowable. And when you think about the site today, given that it's basically just surface parking, a meaningful reduction in terms of that and the benefits that lower impervious cover provide in terms of water absorption and those different elements.
Okay, next question. How many parking spaces will be on the site, and will each living unit be entitled to at least one parking space?
So I'll answer that. We will absolutely meet code required parking. Yes, every living unit will have at least one space. I think there was another question I saw in the chat about gated garage. At least at this point, what we're looking at conceptually is the ground floor would have some visitor parking, trash, but that the resident parking would be gated. And we would also have likely 2 to 3 visitor spaces along our main entry drive for those folks that, you know, are running in quickly, have drop-offs, sort of picking someone up, or potentially going to lease an apartment that we would have adequate parking for visitors and drop-off. But we intend to fully park the project. I mean, we're not looking to have spillover parking or, you know, folks parking. I think I saw a comment on Green Lawn. We're working closely with the property owner to the north, Gina, to ensure that she doesn't have to worry about spillover parking. So it's in everyone's best interest, ours especially, as we try to, or I shouldn't say especially, but in order to lease these apartments, we need to be able to prove to our residents and their visitors we have adequate parking. So at a minimum, we'll meet code, but I don't foresee parking issues that are going to spill over onto neighborhood streets.
Okay. Are there any other means of ingress, egress to the property other than by entering, exiting from Burnett Road?
No.
Yeah, and you would have the that shopping center, which also enters and exits on Burnett Road.
Okay. I'm just to even it. Oh, I thought we had somebody with their hand up. I think Joe, do you not have any questions?
Well, I had the question about Allendale concerned about traffic, turnaround traffic and parking on Green Lawn. And the answer seems to be that we're going to handle that stuff. And so that was my question.
Okay.
So that was all.
Okay. So Carolyn asked.
Maureen, I would just add on traffic, in that prior case, which we were involved in, obviously, a lot of work was done with ATD. Apparently, and y'all will know a lot more about this than I will, the corridor improvement's going to include a raised median in the middle of Burnett Road, and which is why they required us to get that joint access easement to use right at the light to allow for safe left turns into what is now the commercial property to the north of us, but for which we have a joint use access easement across that property into that would then lead you into the garage.
Yeah, I was involved in the Burnett Road corridor stuff, and so that was part of my concern. But just the backup at the traffic light is enough to force that kind of traffic too. So but thank you guys. Y'all look like you're headed in the right direction on this.
Okay. And yeah, sorry I missed the question about the gated entrance. Thank you for answering that. Okay, so Carolyn asked, will the owner work through the LLC? And if so, then how could the city or any other party enforce commitments for fencing, trash receptacles, and even the affordability of a certain number of units?
That's a great question. So if it's in a conditional overlay, it gets pulled immediately as soon as you submit a site plan. Because at that point it is enforceable. It's in the ordinance. The ordinance is law. It is therefore required once it's in that ordinance. The main piece that I had mentioned before, that due to state law is not allowed to be put in a zoning ordinance, is the affordable housing element. And what we would do for that is enter into an agreement with a third-party entity. There's a number of them in town that have done this type of thing in the past, that operate specifically in affordable housing, so they're familiar with how all this works. They have the capacity and the institutional knowledge to know how to enforce those types of agreements. And then that would thereafter be enforceable through that entity. It would run with the land, so it could not be unilaterally dismissed by this owner or a future owner, because that third party would be party to that and would have full enforcement authorities to be able to ensure compliance with that. And in addition to that, normally what you see when someone goes out to, and Melissa, you can speak to this much better than I, but my understanding is that if you're a builder, if you're an entity that develops projects, when you go to raise capital for projects, one of the first things that the entity that is lending the money to be able to do that is going to ask is, are you in compliance with all of the various rules that are going to be applying to this property? And that would include both, the rules that are in the ordinance, the law that applies to this, the conditional overlay provisions that the city would also enforce, as well as a private agreement with a third party to enforce the affordable housing elements.
That's all
Okay.
accurate.
Okay. So Carolyn's other question is, will the buildings be constructed of highly flammable materials such as particle board and plastic materials? If so, what solutions are there for resident egress in the event of a fire?
So Melissa, you can probably speak to this, or maybe even Harrison can, but we have various building codes in the city of Austin and across the United States that are meant to prevent dangerous situations. And that includes fire, that includes a lot of different facets of living. And any building has to be built to those standards of safety. And I can tell you as well that the fire department, when they do their review, because our professional city staff who have institutional knowledge of these codes review every site plan that comes through. And the fire department doesn't take fire safety lightly. It's something that they take very seriously. And Melissa, I don't know if you want to speak more to building codes and those types of items in fire safety or any other type of safety, just from your extensive experience in this field.
I would only add, I think that certainly at a minimum we'll absolutely be meeting fire code, but we build high quality projects aesthetically, and we absolutely will not be building with particle board, plastic, and so I can provide some assurance there. But to your point, at a minimum, I mean, we're going to meet the fire safety codes, the building codes, and we'll also meet the requirements associated with hose lengths and access for Austin Fire Department to make sure our residents and neighboring property owners and residents are safe. That's utmost priority.
It'll also be sprinklered per fire code with our building height. So just another FYI.
Thank you, Harrison. Good point.
So the ingress egress question has already been answered. The next question is, what augmentations will be necessary for residents to have adequate water, sewer infrastructure without interfering with surrounding owners on the same mains and lines?
I can answer that question. So we have to go through the process of a service extension request to the City of Austin Water Utility. And part of that is that the city analyzes our proposed demand, and ensures that the city's utility lines have enough capacity. And if they do not have enough capacity, we would be obligated to upgrade the lines to ensure that there's capacity.
Okay, so Carolyn has a comment. There is no height of fence that will screen nearby single-family residences from the view of residents on the 10th floor of the building near Burnett Road. Don't know if you want to comment to that comment or move on to the next question.
Well, I would just reiterate, we're talking about 6 stories, not 10, and that's along Burnett Road. But for quite a majority of the property on the backside, if you will, we're at 40 feet, which is, I think, a pretty reasonable height. In fact, I'm fairly certain the existing zoning of LO allows 40 feet. So just so we're clear, we're not proposing a 10-story building.
Okay, so Janice asks, are there any conditions under which the prospective owner would agree to a maximum height of 60 feet for the entire property?
Melissa, you can speak to this, but I don't think that my understanding is that's not doable. But
it's
Melissa,
not it's not, we're not able to achieve the yield that we need in order to make the project viable. So no, that doesn't work in this case for us.
Yeah, and also for context, part of I think the rationale for MF6, part of the reason why it's available as a zoning tool, is because it does make that trade-off in terms of a number of different trade-offs. But one of the trade-offs being that you are saying to yourself, I'm going to limit my impervious cover significantly below what a lot of the alternatives are, and your building cover, and so you kind of constrict some of those areas, but you're able to achieve some of that by adding a bit of additional height. And furthermore, the city does have compatibility standards to make sure that height is only being allowed in areas where it is an appropriate and compatible distance from single family. So for instance, you are unable to go above 60 feet until you are a football field's length away from the nearest single family property. And because of the shape of this site, if you're imagining it, the single family kind of comes up the north side a little bit. So that is the nearest one. So you're talking about a football field's length away from that closest one. Everyone else, it's more than a football field's length away, because even though they're further, the closest one is the triggering property. So it's a solid distance from that one. And then for everyone else, it's even further from that.
Okay. So Sarah Lewis says, briefly, what options are available for the use of pervious cover materials in order to reduce runoff? I understand that the site is currently nearly 100% impervious cover and that the development will reduce the percentage. I'm asking specifically if there are pervious cover options that are approved for use by the city for fire and other lanes. Can we go lower than 85% contemplated for the development by using pervious cover options?
Before we answer, I think Harrison, only to help on this, there's no stormwater detention facility now, is there?
Correct. There's no detention, and we'll be reducing impervious cover, which would result in no detention being in the proposed condition. But we will be adding, this is a different subject, but we'll be adding water quality treatment to the site, which doesn't exist today. So improving the water quality aspect of our development. And then to the pervious paver question, we are proposing pervious pavement systems that are credited towards the impervious cover number. And they are acceptable per the environmental criteria manual.
Okay, just a time check. Our meeting is supposed to end at 7:30. At 7:28. I'll just keep going, and when we get to 7:30, we can decide if we want to get the rest of the questions or what we want to do. So go ahead and get this one in. This is Carolyn. I'm sure you must be aware that the Laguna Gloria water main is very bad condition, leaking nearly half of the entering water supply each day. So how do you plan to get sufficient water volume and pressure to the 10th floor residents at the flush and brush hours in the morning and evening?
Right. So there will be no 10th floor.
Wait a minute. I think that's the service extension request was sent to Austin Water Utility. Austin Water Utility has engineers that are here for the community to evaluate, and I would encourage, a call to Austin Water Utility to get more information about their analysis in terms of the use. But we're confident that there will be enough flow there. That is why we applied for a service extension request for that particular analysis.
Yeah, and we've actually done a hydrant test as well to confirm pressure in the neighborhood, and it's fairly high for our site specifically.
Okay, I'm going to move past and get to some other questions. Current zoning requires a 50-foot vegetative buffer from single-family homes. So that's a comment from Chip. What is the restrictive covenant that Stratus seeks to terminate?
There's a restrictive covenant from the 1970s that said that at the time there were no compatibility standards. There was a completely different zoning code, and my understanding is that they were rezoning that back part to be basically office. I think it ended up being kind of converted to the current office type, even though it was a prior one. And at the time, the city did compatibility basically on a case-by-case basis. And so what they said was that you shall have the 20-foot setback. Since that time, we now have a compatibility standards that require a 25-foot setback. So it's actually kind of obviated by that. And Melissa can speak to this better than I, but often when folks go through processes with properties, it's common to try to be able to do what they clear up title. So if there's something that doesn't matter anymore, quote unquote, it doesn't have controlling factor because there's something else, you clear it up in order to make it more streamlined so that you don't have a trillion different documents going back decades and decades that folks have to wade through in the future. You just have the ones that are controlling. And in this case, that one has been subsequently subsumed by compatibility standards and doesn't have controlling factor because compatibility is 25 feet. That one's 20 feet. Compatibility controls.
Okay, so it's past 7:30. I'm going to ask the applicants, are y'all willing to continue to get all the questions answered, or how do you feel about that?
I'm fine to stick around. I don't.
Yeah, I think we can. Why don't we go through the questions that were posted prior to 7:30 and quickly work through those, because it doesn't look like there's very many more. If we can just quickly get to just the questions, not the comments, I think that'd be fair to everybody.
Okay. So let's see. Did we get the answer to the AISD question?
I don't recall hearing that one.
Okay. What discussions have you had with AISD regarding accommodations for the children?
Yeah, so every case you're required to file an education impact statement that is sent to the school district so that they can comment on the nearby schools and their level of capacity. And I believe, has that EIS, so that will be filed again. So we'll have an updated EIS sent to AISD with the zoning application, and that information will be available with the zoning package when the staff begins its review. Should happen in the next 30 days.
Okay. Next question. Is there a requirement to have an internal parking garage, or could that change to parking all along the complex? Could another owner add outdoor parking?
Yeah, you could have another owner do outdoor parking, but then you eat up all of your space to put your multifamily units. So, you know, you get to a point where it just won't work financially to make that happen. It just doesn't work to have a suburban project with, you know, surface parking everywhere.
So, Chip says, would like to see some dedicated on-site park space like the Pearl on Koenig Lane. Let's see. Carolyn says, has Todd actually tried out his visual estimate from a hotel? I have. In New Orleans, if you are going to have a 12-foot high stories, even 48-foot high buildings are extremely intrusive. Let's see, Brad, sorry I missed the answer whether property will be gated.
So there's going to be some, Melissa said that what will happen is the parking will have visitor parking that'll be available for people who are visiting, and then there'll be parking for the residents that will be gated inside the garage.
Okay, Janice says, are you saying that the developer cannot make this project profitable if it cannot be built to a height of 90 feet?
And it would be 75 feet there, and the answer would be yes. It's 75 feet, because that's the proposal that we've kind of promoted.
Especially when it comes to, I mean, you also have to consider there's a large cost to the affordable units, and in order to make that viable, you need additional space to be able to carry the cost of those units, which I think, I think we think that that's a major community benefit, especially given that we're in a high opportunity area, and these would be the first income restricted units in Crestview.
Let's see. So Brad says, if others agree, I'm proposing a higher fence along the back of single family residence, maybe 15 feet.
I don't think you can legally do that, but if whatever is legally allowed, Brad, happy to connect and figure that out. But I think the max is 8 feet, but we should all triple check that. We'll go back and look at the code. Happy to connect on that.
Okay, so that's all.
The code? Aren't we amending the plan right now? Isn't that the purpose of what we're doing here? So couldn't we change it if we asked for it? I mean, that's my understanding of what's happening.
That's a great point. So this is you can do that in there's two particular types of zoning where you can actually modify the code provision. In this particular case, because we're doing it in a standard zoning category, all you can do is make things more restrictive. And it's interesting because going higher on your fence would be, arguably would be making something more restrictive, but they wouldn't view it that way. They would view it as being, I'm prepared to ask them. I'm certainly prepared to ask them. And we will ask them that question via email and give you the answer.
Yeah, and in addition to that, just for context, with zoning, there's only a limit to what you can do. The zoning districts are basically, they are tools that the city has created. You take it off the shelf and then you can go more restrictive, like Waylon was saying, but you can't rewrite all sorts of rules. You're in a narrow band of what you are actually allowed to ask for, and it's basically an instrument that they've already created. You can't kind of, write your own, completely rewrite your own land development code rules.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everybody. I think that was really helpful.
Okay, so what I will do is I will stay online for maybe good 5, 10, maybe not 10 minutes, maybe 5 extra minutes. If participants want to just go in the chat box and add any general comments, I can take those general comments and add them to the staff case report. So I'll just leave it open a little bit longer if people just want to add in general comments. I see Janice has another question, but we can send that to the applicant tomorrow and we can get back to you. So there's any last minute stuff about process. So what will happen after this meeting, staff will meet, we'll make a recommendation, we'll work with the planning contact team on getting their recommendation, and then we'll start scheduling it for planning commission and city council. Any questions about process?
I would just add, we'll be filing a zoning case as well, and we'll get a copy of that to the neighborhood association so that the zoning will reflect what we've been talking about, this MF6. Our hope, of course, would be that we have an agreement with the Crestview Neighborhood Association that we could then explicitly request these conditional overlays, these restrictions, as part of that base district request to multifamily 6. And that I think we'll get that uploaded tomorrow, possibly.
Okay. So if people who want to stay and comment, I'll stay open. For those who want to go ahead and log off, I wish you have a nice evening.
And thank you, Maureen, for for running this. And Jesse.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very much for the opportunity to share the details with you all.
Maureen, I think we have someone who maybe joined late and has a hand raised. I don't know if you want to hear their comment or question and take it down.
Okay. Okay, Anne, we're still recording. If you have a question for the applicant,
Yeah, thank you. I'll be, can you all hear me?
yes. Mhm.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I've got a question about the restrictive covenant conditional overlay, sort of a two-part question. So I'll ask both parts and then I'll mute. Can the restrictive covenant for the affordable housing portion, can we specify the unit mix for that within that covenant or within, yeah, and there's definitely, I think, an interest in the community for some family-friendly units there. So we'd like to see a mix of 2 and 3 bedrooms with the 1-bedroom units that I'm assuming are planned. So yeah, my question is, can we specify that in the restrictive covenant? And will the conditional overlay about the height, will that specify like all the points where it's stepped down? Or will we just be talking about like 75 feet and then 40 feet in the back? Or can we be super specific in that conditional overlay? And can we also do just sort of a belt and suspenders approach and do a restrictive covenant for that as well? And that's all I've got.
Yeah, so I'll start backwards. You asked, if you want to do a restrictive covenant with the neighborhood association, you can, but then you're stuck enforcing that and the city won't add a conditional overlay. The advantage, candidly, of a conditional overlay is the city is the entity that would be enforcing that. You wouldn't have to hire a lawyer. They will not enforce a private restrictive covenant. They've made that very clear. Then then your middle question was, will the conditional overlay be explicit? The answer is yes. It'll be explicit about the places that we've been talking about and that we showed you where it would be 40 feet and where it could then go higher. So we would be explicit about that in the conditional overlay. And in terms of unit mix, I think the cost of these units, which is not subsidized, this is not a tax credit deal. There's no subsidy coming from the government. This is all being managed financially by the market units are going to have to end up covering the cost. And each of these units, in the city did a study in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, are more than $200,000 per unit in terms of cost for a 1-bedroom. So I would expect that there would be a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. There'll be very few, if any, 3 bedrooms in the entire complex anyway. So I think you'll see, and what we can engage in some discussion with your support, is having maybe a pro rata mix so that the market units match the, the affordable units match the market unit mix, if that makes sense.
And the only thing I wanted to add was that I think there was also a question about whether the conditional overlay could add duplicative elements that were already in code. And the answer to that, my understanding of that, is that the law department does not do that and will not do that. You're not allowed to, if there's already a provision that exists in the code that requires us to do something, the law department will not put that into a conditional overlay, just repeating something that already exists in code.
That is correct. That has been their position. Maureen, thank you very much for organizing us, and Mark, I think, is doing it as well. So thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'll stay on if anybody has any last-minute questions for staff. And thank you, Jesse. You don't have to stay any longer. I appreciate it.
Sure. Do you want me to stop recording?
Yeah, go ahead and stop.
Okay. Have a good night, Maureen.
Okay, bye-bye.